Here we go, guys. Well, I do want to welcome all of you all that are watching, especially my Leadership Lynchburg family. Today is day 2 after a very hard weekend in Lynchburg. And I reached out to some in my Leadership Lynchburg family, who I'm going to introduce you to in just a minute, and also some friends who aren't Leadership Lynchburg family, but they are my Lynchburg community family that I've worked with for a number of years. And I just reached out yesterday because we've got to start having a different conversation. We've got to get uncomfortable. And so today's the start of that. And, Leadership Lynchburg's mission is to strengthen individuals for personal, professional, and community leadership. And I've been proud of that mission. I've been proud of our graduates. And I think we have an obligation to lead positively with influence during this time. And so we're going to get uncomfortable today. And we're going to figure out how we can start some positive change in this community. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. So the Brady Bunch left-hand corner is Anthony and Stephanie Andrews. They are distinguished alumni of Leadership Lynchburg who went through the program together, which was kind of fun. And they didn't fight one time, which I just can't even understand. But they are also amazing friends and parents. And I just knew they could help us think about how do we talk to kids about this. Underneath them is Ethel Reeves. Ethel and I don't remember how we first met, to be honest with you. Ethel is currently the Director of Engagement, Equity, and Opportunity at Lynchburg City Schools. She's getting ready to be a published author. I'm just putting that out there. And she's someone I respect a lot, who is really doing some heavy groundwork within the schools to bring equity and parental engagement around issues in our city. Then next to her is Erin Smith, another published author and Leadership Lynchburg alumni, and is the Dean of Students at University of Lynchburg, and just appreciate you being here. And on the bottom is Leslie King, and Leslie and I met through the Dialogue on Race and Racism years ago. I don't remember how many, we're not going to talk about how long ago that was because we're not any older. But she's an equity and engagement consultant, and if you ever want to have a real candid, off-the-cuff conversation, that's Leslie. Like, get in my face, tell me what I need to know, and she does that well. So we're just going to get right in and start, and I'm going to ask you all just to chime in on, given your lens, why are we at this juncture in our country and in our community? Given where you sit, why are we here?
I mean, I'll share first. I think we're here because I think our country continues to perpetuate the cycle of injustice, quite frankly. I mean, this has been going on for really since the inception of our nation. And it's not that, it had gone away or anything like that. I mean, we're able to see much more now that people have camera phones, and more things are caught on camera, and more injustices are caught on camera. And I think that, the cycle continues to repeat itself, because I think that in this country, we discuss and we talk about, people have, liberties and freedoms and things of that nature. When you see some of the videos, or when you hear about some of the actions that are happening, or when you experience them yourself, then that begins to make you think, then why am I not receiving the same kind of liberties, and why does it seem like these injustices continue to occur, and especially for people who look like me, because that's what it seems like an overwhelming majority of these things are. And so I think we as a nation, I mean, this isn't anything new. And I would argue that when things like this happen, Christine, you and I talked about this a little bit, that, we have a lot of folks who will post and say, I stand with Minneapolis, or, this is wrong or that is wrong. And similar to any other catastrophe like Hurricane Katrina, aid sent initially, and then people just forget. And then this is why we get back there again, because people refuse to, or maybe I will say refuse to continue to do the work when it's not a time of crisis. When we talk about injustice, and we talk about some of the things that we've seen or some of the things that people have said or done, when we forget about these things happening, you already know the phrase, history is bound to repeat itself.
Yeah.
And history is going to keep repeating itself until there is action, consistent action, even in times when there's not a crisis, for everybody, not just people who are marginalized or underrepresented as well, but people who are in the majority, to where they can influence their world to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen.
It's good.
I would agree with Aaron. I mean, I think this is not anything new. We hear the names of people that have been brutalized by the police over the years. We hear Tamir Rice, we hear Ahmaud, we hear all these names of probably some really amazing people, but I also hear in my mind Clarence Beard, because that happened in 2006 here in Lynchburg. And I was one of the firefighters that responded to that call, and his home was searched without a warrant, without cause, and he suffered some medical problems in the process of him scuffling with the police, but the police were also there doing things that they should not have been doing, and we ended up doing CPR on this gentleman for a long time, in the middle of an apartment complex that was rioting at that same time, filled with a bunch of police and dogs and everything else, and a scene that has a ton of tension. And out of that became, the dialogue on race and racism, and trying to create a bridge or communication where we could actually come together and have a relationship with each other and be uncomfortable. So this is not the first time we've been uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable since, I was 5 or 6 years old, because the conversations that my mom have with me are different than what a conversation that your mom may have with you. And so, I agree with Aaron wholeheartedly. This is not anything new. And we, as much as we would like to think that it ends here, I'm not sure it does. And so we have to continue to have those conversations with our children, and teach them how to not be a statistic, how to go the extra mile, how to be seen equal in other people's eyes, how to stay out of people's way, keep your head down so you don't make a ton of noise, because we don't want to draw attention to you being a Black male or Black female. So yeah, it's this emotional time for sure. So
I think we're here for the reasons that have been stated, and I think about my lens, which, depending on which hat I'm wearing, my lens could be, really different. I also think about the question, why are we here? How did we get here? And here means so many different things for all of us, I think. I think the focus, yes, is on the injustices that continue to occur. Here for me right now in this moment is my thinking, my mental state, and how did we get here? We got here because of our history. As an educator, not everyone, and particularly Black people, were not given the opportunity to get an education at the same time that other people of, as they say, non-color were. And so that creates an issue, especially in our day and time where we're expected to perform at the same level or higher than others. And so when we look at our family structure, it's not the same. My grandparents didn't have the same opportunities that others did. So when we think about our history, that's why we're here. When we think about the cases that have been mentioned and the fact that this continues to occur, there has been very little communication, face to face. When we describe that in your face communication about the truths of what's truly happening, that has not occurred. As an educator, yes, I was one who kind of went against the grain on many occasions, because I believed in the underdog, and I'll let people define underdog as they would. But I remember my first couple of years teaching, and I was told, go through your list of students, and anybody who's an athlete shouldn't be in Algebra 2, and anybody who's this shouldn't be that. And I thought, that's odd. And I didn't, live by that philosophy. So when we talk about the oppressed mind, and that's the oppressed mind of our students, those who've been told over and over and over again that they can't do, but then also the oppression that is placed on, and not just students, but others, because of our biases, because of our experiences, and just again, failure to talk about where we are. And I say where we are because we've been here before.
Yeah.
So communication, history, and oppression, our mindsets have to change.
So Leslie, a little bit, I want to go deeper on that. And given I met you when we did the dialogue on race and racism, and we challenged our Leadership Lynchburg alumni to get uncomfortable and to get involved with that. And that for me, in case y'all hadn't noticed, I'm a white female. That for me was very eye-opening, because it was not something I noticed all throughout school. I had people of color that were good friends of mine, and we didn't talk about the oppression or the biases that they felt. Now, they didn't feel that in my home when they came to visit, but we didn't even have that conversation. And it wasn't until I did the move forward, move back activity within the dialogue that I just, was dumbfounded. So, you all have mentioned that we're here because history is repeating itself, and we have not gotten uncomfortable enough to continue the conversations face to face. We started that, I thought, with the dialogue on race and racism. So what do we do now? Like, how do we continue this, Leslie? You're a consultant that talks about this all over. Right. Like, how do we not let this happen without doing something to move the needle?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I'm glad to be here. I am not okay today. I just want to say that right off the bat. And I had some hesitation in being here, but I'm here. And so I do appreciate the opportunity. I think that the dialogue was helpful, as you said, in a lot of ways, for people to kind of examine their individual attitudes, right? And see where there are divisions, which is helpful. And that's one way of dealing with of race or racism, or issues around how we address institutional racism or structural racism. But it's not the only way. That racism happens in a myriad of ways. I think that it's helpful to have a conversation, but a conversation can't be the end, right? And I continue to hear from people because as a direct result of being involved in that initiative, that they move beyond just the conversation to it affecting changes in their individual lives, which is helpful and is what we want. I think we also have to figure out how we move the conversation to structural change, right? So how do we make institutional change? Because as the other panelists have alluded to, we're dealing with a legacy of institutional racism, slavery, Jim Crow, 400 years plus of all of those things. And so ever so often they converge, and then we have disruptions like we do across the country. And I think that when we talk about a dialogue, we have to think about the people who are being harmed the most by racism, right? How do we put our resources toward changing the conditions of those people. And I think one thing you have to do, you got to listen to Black people. You have to listen to Black people. And when Black people talk about what causes them harm and pain, we have to listen to them and figure out how do we create a more equitable space for everyone. But in particular, because of the issue that we're talking about today, and is police brutality. And it's been something that our country as a nation has not been able to come to a solution about. And the other piece I'll just say is that I've been in conversations, national conversations around policing. And it's the same way with race, that race harms everyone, right? So it doesn't just harm Black people, but it harms whites, other people of color, but in different ways, right? And so policing also, and most police and those who work in policing may not say it, but the system is harming them. It harms them in ways when they are dealing with certain situations. So the question is, how do we create a system that holds holds those accountable who may be doing things that are causing harm? And at the same time, how do we increase awareness by having these conversations? And it's the balance of the two, because to be quite honest with you, Christine, that people who are being harmed the most by any type of ism, their patience for conversation is low, right? Unless that conversation leads to some type of substantial change for them in their lives. And I will say with that dialogue, we had some of that,
Yeah,
right? So we had the, so now you have that, the Beacon of Hope was working on access to higher education. And I will say that one of the things that came out of that dialogue was a citizens review board, that there were citizens who formed an action group who wanted to have instituted in Lynchburg a citizens review board that would hold accountable, not just hold accountable, but be a part of being a conduit from the community to the police, but also hold accountable, explore policies, those types of things. And for a variety of reasons, that did not come to fruition. And there were people who wanted to do something like that. So I think we have things like that have come up and they have not been moved forward, right? So I think there are solutions and things out there that people know about. And for whatever reason, they don't come to fruition, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the conversation is important as long as the conversation is substantive, right? So that it is moving us toward some real action, and that the people who are leading that conversation are, and by and large, are the people who are most affected by it.
That's so good. And, I think what one goal of today is to increase the awareness of the inequity that is happening, right? To those that may not see it or feel it every day like you all have. And what you just said, Aaron and I had that conversation yesterday, like, quit asking me if you're not going to do anything with what I've told you. And
Right.
I mean, you could take that with take out racism for a minute, but you, as an employee, if you're asked to give your opinion on stuff and nobody ever takes that advice, you stop giving that opinion and your engagement goes down. So that is poignant. And I think,
Right. Because and just to add to what you're saying there, Christine, then I'll be quiet. But it's about trust and what trust looks like to different people, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes we ask people to come to the table for a conversation, and then there's fatigue because that conversation doesn't necessarily lead to the change that they want. And I understand that. I also understand that it doesn't matter what you do, you have to have some type of conversation.
Yeah.
You're gonna have some type of conversation to get there.
So let's go there. Because we'll stay on conversation. Good segue, even though we didn't plan that. And so, Stephanie, I know you're quiet, but we're going to start with the conversation on how do we talk to our families about this? And then conversely, how do we talk to our employees or those that again, a lot of times this is taboo. Oh, I don't want to talk about it. It's uncomfortable in the workforce. So, but we've got to reach out. We've got to have conversations. I know we had one at staff meeting yesterday. We just gave people space to talk about how they were feeling, and that was eye-opening. So let's talk about conversations. In your opinion, and we'll start with Stephanie, and then we'll go around. First of all, I wanted you all to talk about how you're talking to your kids about this, how you're having that hard conversation. But then in your own, for everybody else, how do we start these discussions and get uncomfortable and not get in hot water with it? Because, that's the fear. Like, oh my gosh, if I bring this up, what's going to happen if I bring this up? How do we have those conversations? So Anthony and Stephanie, will you talk a little bit about how you're having those conversations with kids and maybe some suggestions? Because Anthony, you also work in preschool. So at some point you're having, yeah.
So I think for us, we're having conversations that are real and honest. And we are having two different conversations because we have a 7-year-old son. So there's that aspect. You have to have the 7-year-old conversation, to where they're not quite understanding, but you want to be able to explain and so they can know what's going on. But then also having that conversation as a young Black male, things that will change for you. And then on the flip side of that, we have a 13-year-old daughter who's in the teenage years, who's seeing this and, trying to, wrap her head around what's going on, aside with being a teenager and dealing with a lot of different things. And so it's just having those real conversations with them to explain the history, to explain what's going on in the world, to explain what's going on locally. We rode by some of the peaceful demonstrations so that, they can see it heads on, and we can hear to answer questions if they have it. But then also that's that sad part where you drive through the peaceful conversations or the peaceful protests. But then in the next mix of less than 24 hours, you have to have another conversation about how that turned into something different. But we have to have it. And so it's just being real and honest about what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. On TV, we watched a man die, right? For 8 minutes. And I'm gonna be honest with you, let's be uncomfortable. If the roles were reversed, that man would have been locked up the same day. It took weeks for him to be in custody, right? And so we had a conversation yesterday at the fire station, and I had to talk to one of my guys about it. And I asked him, I said, how do you, what are your thoughts? What are the thoughts going through your head when you get pulled over by a police officer? And he says, give him my license and registration. I said, yeah, that's not my thought process. My thought process is to put my hand on the steering wheel so he knows that I'm not a threat to him. And then I will get my registration. But a lot of times Black men, especially, and Black women don't have that opportunity to have those conversations with the police officer because the police officer may or may not be having a bad day or have an attitude, or they might have their own preconceived biases, whatever the case may be. And history tells me that if I get pulled over by a police officer, today might be the day I die. Because that person doesn't know my personality, who I am, what I've done for the community, and so forth and so forth. Today might be today. And so that's a fear that I wake up every day with. I shouldn't have it, but that's a fear that I have for my son as well. And those conversations will eventually happen. Of course, he's 7. He doesn't know all that stuff. So right now, the conversation with him is just how to be a good person, right? And then eventually, those conversations about race will happen in our household. We're already having those conversations with Alea, who's 13, because she gets into TikTok and social media and so forth, and she becomes a follower. And we have to help her understand that she needs to do her research and figure out what's actually going on and not just listening to what friends are telling her. So yeah, conversations are pretty difficult for sure.
I'd like to piggyback off of that too, because I feel the exact same way that Anthony does. And I'm not the kind of person that shows a tremendous amount of emotion, but I was riding around with a friend of mine the other day and he's black, and a police car just began to follow us in the car. And real talk, this is our conversation. Like, this could be it. Like that is real. And I'm not an emotional, like, I'm not exaggerating. Like that is very legitimate. Like, this could be it. Point blank period, no matter what you do. And I think that's part of it as well. When we talk about the injustice piece, is about, I am also trying to do everything right. I'm trying to do everything that you say, and that could still end up being, the last day of my life. And I think that is something that we do have to talk to our kids about. And same thing with the Andrews family. We're very real. We're very upfront with our family about it. And I would argue, Christine, you had asked about how do you talk about this at work, and we're going to have a conversation tomorrow, me and my team members, and I think that it's important to share just a couple of things. Number one is about what happened. Like, you tell me what happened from your lens. Let's talk about what you saw, what you experienced, and whatnot. I think the second thing is what should have happened. So, right, thinking about that, should anything different have happened there? And again, you can find out a lot by people's responses to these things. What should have happened in that particular scenario? And then what could have happened if something would have been different? So, had another officer stepped in, what could have happened then, or whatever scenario you're talking about. And then lastly, what would happen if things look different? And then how can you affect that particular change? So very specifically talking about what happened, what did we see, what did we experience, as well. What should happen, what could happen, and what would happen if things look different. Kind of like what Leslie was saying a little bit earlier, in terms of making sure that some of the folks who are marginalized are at the table, not some, but the people who are marginalized are at the table. That a lot of times, right, when some of the this is what could happen if we did things differently, or this is what should happen, like, a lot of that stuff just goes out the window. And that's when dialogue gets tiring, and then that's when you start seeing how many folks are upset, and then folks start setting things on fire and start doing things of that nature because I'm tired of not being heard. Like, that's real. Like, you see, I mean, these degrees and all this other stuff, right? I'm a doctor, and that doesn't matter. I'm black. Real talk. Like, like, me being accomplished does matter in some spheres, but at the end of the day, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I recognize, and unfortunately I do have to share this with my kids, you have to recognize that the system is set up so that you are at a disadvantage. If you don't do everything right, like, you can't make the same kind of mistakes. So let's take that being pulled over, for example, right? If I'm having a bad day, and the first thing I do is kind of move my neck and be like, why'd you pull me over? Right, that could be a life-ending mistake. Whereas for someone else, you might get the benefit of the doubt. For somebody that's not of color, you might be able to get the benefit of the doubt. I have found that that's not always the case for people of color. I've watched it for myself, and I've seen it for other people as well.
Aaron, it's really, okay.
I'm sorry, Ethel, go. No, ladies first, always.
Well, I was going to say, Aaron, listening to you, of course, makes me think about my mother lens. My son is 26. He was an athlete, big guy, probably 280 pounds, 6'7". And the conversations that I have with him, even as an adult, are what you have shared. And I apologize for my emotion. When the phone rings, it's just scary because you don't know what he's going to describe or what his experiences are going to be. And I've been blessed to have good kids, but he's a big guy. And so what is a stop for a tail light or speeding or what have you? As you've said, he cannot hide being a Black male, and he can't hide his size. And when I shared earlier about our biases, what is someone thinking automatically about someone of my son's stature? When I think of my daughter who's 19, and I'm going to say fortunately, she's had her own experiences with racism, and she had me. She had me to take her through rules and regulations and policies and how to fight for your rights. We had to go through a process in her educational career where, you know, I had to help her hold back so she could go forward. And what I mean by that, it was I had to let her go through a student conduct hearing and be embarrassed and be lied on so that I could then say, now, because they did this to you, this is what we have to do in order to get justice. And so I had to show her, I had to demonstrate what that looks like. A lot of people don't have people to demonstrate what that looks like. And so I wanted you to know, yes, I get it. And it's not, your children are younger than mine, Stephanie and Aaron, but it's also very real for adult children. And as mom, I have to take a stand as well to make sure that I'm not saying, oh, you're grown, it's just gonna happen. No, I have to prepare you. And that's the unfortunate part of this whole thing.
Thank you for sharing that, Ethel. I appreciate that. Can I add something to this as well, Christine? Because I've done some consulting with school divisions in New England and work with administration and students. And I think that, as you heard, for Black or African American families, we have those conversations readily with our children in many ways, right? From a very young age. And I think that other families can do the same. And it may not be to make sure their child is coming home at night in the same way. But I think what they can begin to do is to have conversations with their children about reflecting on how their experience at home may be different than someone else. I think they can have explicit conversations with their children about racism, because the research shows that even at a very young age, children begin to think about race, even in the absence of an explicit conversation. They begin to see those cues of not seeing people of color, Black people, Indigenous people around, and they begin to form, in many ways, negative attitudes in the absence of explicit conversations. So I think it's important for especially white families to begin having those conversations with their children about who they are, what's their culture, where do they live, why things may be different. Then on top of that, I think it's important for them to read books by Black authors, movies, expose them to different things, because it is clear that we live in a very racialized society for a variety of reasons. And it's not just about politics, but it's kind of how our society has been created in a lot of ways. And so we don't have those intersections. And that's one of the reasons why the dialogue was important, right? Because you brought people together to be able to discuss that. But I think parents can begin having those conversations with their children now, because I know when I was in elementary school, a young child called me the N-word, a young white child. And I'll never forget that. And he said his parents never didn't want him to play with Black kids. And so, it can start very young, but I think there's an opportunity there. Not only that, I think the older young people are ready to act, right? So they're looking for opportunities to affect positive change. And I think we have to, I think the listening is doing some of this, and that's great as well. But we need to create space where young people can take the lead in our absence. And I had to learn that, yeah, they can do that and they want to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to be able to create a space for them to do that and advocate for change as well.
I love how you're always the one that's giving me my segue to the next question.
Okay.
You just did. You mentioned some very tangible, practical things we can do with our kids, talking to our kids. Let's talk about what else we can do to help move the needle. So talking to your kids is one aspect, but for those that are listening that are not African American or not a person of color, that feels helpless and feels almost inadequate or ill-equipped, what do we do? How do we help move the needle beyond just having this conversation? Because as y'all have said, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face. So those that are listening, what what are some tangible, practical things? Reading books, I heard that. But what else? Are there other things we can do to help move the needle?
I'll let other people go first as I just went.
I'm going to jump in and speak from an educational standpoint. One of the things that I continue to advocate for, and I'm really excited because I believe, as I think about it, I've had opportunities to speak to this on some of the campuses of our colleges and universities. Many times as educators, there may be one or two classes geared towards multicultural education, cultural competency, or what have you. And many times our teachers are not prepared for what they're facing in urban education. We know nationally that the majority of our teachers are middle-class white females, and that is what it is. So my advocacy would be for our community to find ways to, and I know not everybody has time, and I'm not advocating for everybody to go back to school, but if there are ways to have conversations around what it is to understand young people, or whatever, I don't want to give out topics immediately, but to educate, create opportunities so that adults can hear from children, adults can have a better understanding of what it is that our young people are facing, that would be a bonus. The other thing that I would say is that to those who are in education, it is, yes, read the books. We talk a lot about courageous conversations, creating a safe space to have the conversations. Be a part of that, and understand that it may get uncomfortable. Own that people may be angry, people may be upset, people may be completely disconnected. Own that those things may occur, but have the conversations. I know in Lynchburg City Schools where we are in an urban education setting, we can't deny that. We can't run from it. Poverty is an issue. Race is an issue. We have many things that we have to face before we can teach a child how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We have many of those things, but let's have the conversation about what we're facing. My office serves as that space, but I know that I can do more. I know that we can do more. And I know that I need the help of my community members to help us have those conversations. So read, own where we are, fear. As I talk to some of my colleagues, we could sit in a meeting and have a conversation, and then I'll get a text. I wish I had said such and such and such. Go ahead and say what it is that you need to say as an educator, because we can only get better when we communicate and we talk through things.
Yeah, and we should go ahead and acknowledge that I think it's amazing that Lynchburg City Schools created your position, first of all. So, we're not where we need to be, but man, like it's a good first step. And I know we work together on Partners in Education and ways that we can maybe tackle it from that angle as well. Other thoughts? I'm taking notes. If y'all see me look down, I'm like writing as y'all are talking. Leslie.
Oh, go ahead, Anthony. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, we're gonna let Stephanie talk because she never talks.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Yeah, but she talks a whole lot more here. You don't know. For the people out there.
I talk more since my leadership Lynchburg experience.
That's right.
Brought me out. But
you have found your voice, by the way.
No, I was just gonna say that, like Leslie was alluding to, it's never too early to have that conversation with your children. Right. Even if you're in elementary school, even pre-K, and I'll, let you go to preschool talk. But I went to a predominantly white school. I could count on one hand how many people look like me. And, so knowing the differences, having them understand that there is a difference between the color of the skin, and just having those real conversations, even at an early age. Because fast forward to our daughter going to a predominantly white school as well, and having the same conversations that I had to deal with and experiences when I was there, and and it's unfortunate because those conversations aren't happening at that early age. And so I think that that's important to have those conversations early. Go ahead. I'm done.
I lost my train of thought because I was in tune in what you were saying. It was good stuff. Go continue.
I'm done.
Oh, okay.
I'll
Go ahead,
jump in
Leslie.
there then and
Okay,
say,
yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
well, you know, a lot of it we have already talked about starts with conversation, which it does, and then to listen and not discount what the people are saying. So when somebody tells you, kind of as we have described our experience and maybe how we've gotten here as well, that is somebody's reality. You know, we talk about being able to speak our own truth, and just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not my reality. Just because I might not talk about it all the time doesn't mean that it's not my reality.
I love that you said that you quantified what not discounting looks like. Because like, how do I not discount that? It's acknowledging that even if that is not your experience, it is the reality for you. And just sitting in that, you know, we talk at Leadership Lynchburg about social and emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive and adequately assess the emotions and the feelings of someone else. And I can't change it, but emotional intelligence is carrying the weight of that and letting that person have that feeling, and then you reacting differently as a result of what you now know. Because quite frankly, we have an obligation. Once we know something, we have an obligation. So thank you for clarifying just that, Aaron, that I can't fix it, but I can acknowledge in that moment that was your reality.
Yes. And then, so you had mentioned, right, you might not be able to fix it, maybe, but you might be able to influence and think about the manners in which you can influence. So, right. So now that I know the information, this new information that I have, someone's reality, and then what they say, like this would actually help me if X, Y, or Z happened. You may have the ability to change it, or you might not. But being able to take some of those things into consideration and say, you know what, we might be able to do something here. I've talked with some of my staff members about this. I've received messages from folks all around the country just about, they're thinking and they're praying. And one of the things that I always share with those folks is I hope that you are being a positive influence wherever you are. If you're going to speak out, that's fine. Speak out. That is 100% fine. But my mind always goes to, what are you actually going to do? Like speaking is an action, sure. But beyond posting,
yeah,
beyond posting something online and saying like, I'm down for the cause, that's easy to do right now because everybody's doing it. Help me understand what you are going to continue to do consistently beyond this to help folks who are marginalized.
And I hope everybody watching gets that piece of it. Like, cause you're right. Everybody loves being passive aggressive on Facebook, right? But beyond that, beyond behavior on social media, what is my individual responsibility now that I have heard what I've heard? And you can't answer that maybe immediately, but I encourage everybody watching and listening, now that I've heard what I've heard, what can I do?
I know Leslie is
You're about
dying.
to jump in.
She's like,
Leslie, I know she's dying to answer. Let me say this. So with that being said, don't believe, for the viewers out there, don't believe everything that you see on TV, social media, because regardless of what you think, this is actually the rule, not the exception. There are way more smart, educated, hardworking minorities out there than what you see on ghetto TV, right? So we're not all sitting at home waiting for a check, or we're not all on welfare. We're not all, living off a system. There are so many professional people. There are so many hardworking families. There are so many men that are out there taking care of their families. There are so many wonderful moms. There is a ton of people in the world, and especially in our country, that are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They are citizens, right? And so the Cosbys are not the exception. They are the rule. Like this is what I see all the time. I don't see what people put out image-wise that, you know, we're just this tribal type people that kind of sit around and we live off government assistance. That's not what minorities represent at all.
That's
So
good.
yeah. So anyway, go ahead, Leslie. I know you're ready to take it away.
Before she jumps in, let me say two things.
Okay.
One, self-reflection. That's something that I believe is going to be the answer to this. Self-reflect. Look yourself in the face and ask yourself, what am I feeling? From an educational standpoint, do I believe in all students? Do I believe that all children can learn? And if you don't believe that, then you have to ask yourself, why not?
It's
And
good.
that would go back to Anthony's comment of, what do I believe? What am I seeing on TV? Why do I believe that about this group or this person or this type of person or whatever it is? Why do I believe that? And begin to have real conversations with self first.
Yep.
And then I would, if while you're going through that process, I would also say, do no harm. One of the things that Dr. Edwards has helped us through during the pandemic is we've had to make some adjustments. And of course, we had no idea that this incident would occur right after or while we're in this pandemic, but we've had to focus on doing no harm. So even when you don't know what to do, please don't hurt people. Please don't put someone down. Please don't put them in a situation where they're then, you know, having to fight for whatever it is that they're fighting for. But self-reflect and then operate from that place of not harming others.
That's good.
That's really good, Ethel. So just some quick things. I think I appreciate with what Ethel said about self-reflection. People can also take the implicit association test online to get a sense of their bias. It's done by Harvard, and there are a number of bias tests that they can take, and it can give you some glimpse of where you are in terms of bias. There are limitations with the test. It may change, but it's good for a conversation, you know? And so I think that's helpful in terms of that. I think that if for me, it's not just about the individual, but it is about the individual too. If you're a person who has power, influence in a myriad of levels in an organization, then I would ask you to take some courage and create space for others whose voices are not heard. You know, how can you create a space? How can you elevate the voices of the people in your organization, in your community, in your church that aren't heard? Okay. Then I think putting yourself in situations where you are the minority if you're someone in the majority. And listen. Don't go in there, go to the place telling other people what to do. Listen for a while. I think that's also important. If you're an organization, then what does your mission say about equity? What does your mission say about, you know, a lot of organizations, some organizations have explicit anti-racism or equity as a part of their mission. If it's not part of your mission or your purpose, then you're not really, you know, you're going to do a little bit, but not much, right? Yeah. And then looking at your policies, how do your policies impact the people in your organization or the people that you're working with? The other piece is paternalism. Stop it. Stop doing things for people and not doing things either with people or acknowledging and trusting that people have agency to change their circumstances if they're given the right tools.
All right, let me stop you there because you said paternalism, and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know that.
So paternalism means that I think I know what you need and how you need to do it.
So you just said stop doing things for people, do things with people.
Do things with people.
So good, so good.
So that means you can't just say we got a poverty problem and then you solve it. You have to listen to the people who are impacted by it.
Okay.
And then listening, they may not have it completely right, but you can interpret what you're hearing from those people to say, okay, how are they being harmed by what's going on? I think that's important. And then I said this before, and what you're doing here, you are having an affinity conversation. So this is a conversation with Black folk about an issue that's impacting us. We need more of these types of spaces in our community for various groups. And people who are part of these communities should not be afraid to exert and say who they are. We need to celebrate our differences and not try to water them down. We need to respect, we need to recognize how those differences come together and how we have them. But I think this right here in and of itself is a part of change, right? So this conversation itself, but ultimately I also think that we may not be impacted by certain issues as much as other people in other parts of our community, right? And so we only have access to them to an extent, but there are other voices and other things to hear. And I think it's really important to not only hear them, but center them also as we work toward change. So I think that was pretty practical. That was practical.
I got like 10 things. So my to-do list is full. But all joking aside, I am just going to go ahead and say it to the Leadership Lynchburg alumni that are watching. A tangible first step is have coffee, have dinner, have a conversation with someone that does not look like you. Just do it. You got class members, alumni that you went through the program with that are different from you. And it may not just be race. It could be, I'm Muslim and I am uncomfortable, or I'm Christian and I'm uncomfortable and I don't know what that faith looks like. So I'm just going to avoid it, right? Don't do that. So as alumni, have a conversation. Just start asking some questions differently, not how was your day, right? That's not going to get us anywhere.
But I think you have to start with something light to get to the deeper.
Well, sure.
If you don't know them. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. But they can say, Christine said I need to do this. So I'm going to get uncomfortable. Because, I mean, look, you can't, I feel like, we've got to get to a place where we are willing to have an uncomfortable conversation, right? And not to exploit. That's not what I mean by that. But, all right, so we're running out of time. So we might do a 2.0 once we've done some action. That would be even better once we've done some action. Any parting thoughts that might inspire or give us some hope or that would help us heal and move on?
I do. I have one. A little earlier in this conversation, I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, that this isn't the end. And actually, because of our patterns, I believe that. However, if everybody actually took some individual responsibility and did kind of their piece, kind of as Leslie was saying, if you are a policymaker, if you are a small business owner, if you are the head of your house, if you are just you, and you took some personal responsibility about what you could do, and I guess that's utopian thinking, but if everybody actually did that, we could make a difference. We really could. And so my challenge to folks would be really do your part consistently, not just now, not now because there are riots going on and it's on the news every day, but 365 days out of the year. If you do your part, things actually will, if you do your part and other people do their part, things actually will change.
That's good.
Things could change.
Do your part consistently. That's good.
That's it. It's no different. After you talk about your son, being big and playing sports. I was a basketball player, and I just think about that all the time. If every individual on the court did their particular position to the best of their ability, we'd actually be quite successful. Like, if everybody does their part individually, collectively, we will do amazing things.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that I would say that it's okay to feel unsettled right now, that it's okay to feel tension, that part of change involves that. And there are levels of it, of that, but it's okay. The reality is this won't last forever. What we're dealing with right now won't last forever. The question becomes what comes of it in the end, right? What's the result of it? But I find some consolation in recognizing that what we're going through right now won't last forever. And I'm also, like Aaron said, focusing on where your level of influence is and how you can begin to make small changes there. And I think that doing that, and then, yeah, I think that is what it takes, you know. But I also think that, and this is maybe another conversation as well, Christine, this idea of this new normal. I'm not sure what that means, but I would like to get to a new normal, but I think we have to do something different to get there and not just use technology. Like we have to have a different set of ideas and values in order to get to a different normal. And I think that I would say, ask people to lean into moving the opportunity as it presents itself right now. Right now is an opportunity. I think, you know, how you frame things is very important. And I think we are at a place where there's a real opportunity for sustained change. The question becomes, how do we make that happen without using the same way of thinking, the same ideology, and not just a different technology?
Right, a different format.
Yeah, a different
Format
format.
can't be the only thing that changes.
It changes.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. But I think there are some opportunities. I think that there are small, you know, when you look back, we want large scale change. And I think change happens in a multitude of ways, right? So it happens incrementally in ways that are invisible that we don't see, like on a micro scale, and then it happens on a macro scale. And I think things might be changing, right? They just change kind of slow, or they can change big, you know, big, or have a big impact. And just trying to figure out how can we kind of ride that momentum and influence based on our gifts, right? What gifts do we bring into a particular situation and how we can be useful?
2 minutes left. Andrew's family, Reeves, Dr. Reeves, what you got?
I would say everyone knows right from wrong. I don't think anybody is, I'll just say it that way. I know that people know right from wrong. Wrong is wrong, right is right. And I would say be upstanders. Find a way to be an upstander. Call it out. For those in the educational field, in a classroom, call it out. And then we have a way of saying ouch and educate. So not just call it out, but say why it's wrong. Say what the injustice is. And that will create a culture change of people doing what's right and understanding that that it's okay to call out injustices.
I would agree with Ethel. Just call it out. I think you know, we're all in this together. I mean, really, it's not really a race problem. It's a human rights issue, right? And so I think if you are not afraid to call it out for what it is, an injustice or a problem, like let's work together and try to solve that issue instead of just trying to categorize people and put each other in blocks or in a box, if you will. So let's just try to figure it out together, work together on this thing. So.
Definitely.
Ditto.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you. I know after talking with you all yesterday that you are grieving and this is hard. And for you to put that aside and once again have a conversation, I just want to thank you for that. And I know we are committed. We as Leadership Lynchburg, this goes on our agenda at our June meeting on how our curriculum can amplify. We already discussed this, but how can we amplify our efforts regarding equity? So just know that's an action we're going to take as a Leadership Lynchburg board. And individually, just know that I've put the challenge out there to our folks, and I love you all. I thank you for taking the time with us today, and here's to better tomorrows.
Absolutely.
I love you too, Christine. Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Love you all.
Love you too.